If you're looking for a nice easy knit with a short pattern repeat and a really simple pattern multiple, then this design that I've named Archie could be the blanket for you. Archie is worked over just 8 rows, so it's a really nice short repeat to get to grips with, and it's also a really nice and simple repeat because half of the repeat is just garter stitch, so that makes it perfect for a really simple knit in the evenings if you're an experienced knitter, or if you are more of a beginner, then it is still simple enough for you to get to grips with and enjoy knitting in front of the telly without too much concentration. An added bonus of Archie, which I know a lot of you look for when you are working a knitted blanket, is the fact that this pattern is almost reversible. So it does look almost identical on the front and back, the only difference being that on what I would class as the right side you have 2 garter stitch ridges separating your little ribbed sections, and on the reverse you have 3, but aside from that this pattern looks identical on the front and back. To knit a blanket the same size as mine, 60 centimeters wide by 80 centimeters long, you're going to want 400 grams of double knit yarn. I used Stylecraft Bambino in the shade Little Boy Blue, but you can use any shade of DK yarn that you like. If you're not in the UK and you're not familiar with the term DK yarn, you will probably be more familiar with a term like 3-weight yarn or like worsted weight yarn. You are also going to need some 4mm circular needles, and you want them to be at least 100 centimeters long so that they are long enough to accommodate all of your stitches. As well as that, you're going to want your normal tools of embroidery scissors and tapestry needles for sorting out those ends. And then last but not least, you're going to need 2 stitch markers, and we use these to separate where our side borders start and our middle textured panel start. So it just helps give a nice piece of separation between those 2 sections, and it makes it easier to count your stitches. Normally at this point I'd be giving you the pattern multiple for that middle textured panel, but the beauty of Archie, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is the fact there is no specific pattern multiple for this blanket. All that you need to do is to remember to cast on an odd number of stitches. Now for my borders, I allow 18 stitches, so 9 stitches for each side. But because the cast on for this blanket is so simple, you really don't need to worry about how many stitches you cast on, as long as you remember to make sure that it's an odd number. If you're wanting to replicate the blanket that I made as my sample, that's 60 centimeters wide, then you're going to need to cast on a total of 135 stitches, but for this tutorial I'm just going to cast on a small sample. I like to use the long tail cast on, but you can use whichever cast on method you prefer. This blanket will still work. As this blanket is knitted from bottom to top, the first part that we need to tackle is that bottom garter stitch border. Now that consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way, so I'm going to walk you through row 1 and then I'm going to leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 by yourself. As this border is predominantly garter stitch, every stitch with the exception of the final stitch is a knit stitch. So to start your border, you are going to knit your way across the row until you have just 1 stitch left to work on your left hand needle. This final stitch in the row is our selvage stitch, and instead of knitting this stitch and ending up with just raw garter stitch edges up our long sides of our blanket, we are going to use a different technique that will give us a really nice neat edge that looks a little bit like a braid. So the technique we are going to use is a slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front. It's nice and simple to do and really easy to get the hang of. The first thing that you need to do when working this technique is to get your working yarn to the front of your work. The way that I knit means that I just hold this yarn with my right hand needle, and then when I've slipped that stitch I lift it to the front. But if you're somebody that prefers to actually lift the yarn all the way to the front of your work before you slip that stitch, that's absolutely fine as well. Once you've got your working yarn securely at the front of your work, you are going to get your right hand needle and pop it into this final stitch from right through to left, so as if you were going to purl the stitch. You don't want to go in from left to right because that will twist the stitch and we don't want to do that. So slide your right hand needle in from right through to left and slide that stitch firmly onto your right hand needle. At that point you can take your left hand needle out, and then you just want to finish off by making sure that that working yarn is very definitely at the front of your work. So that's row 1 of 15 done. I will now leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 by yourself, and I will go away and do the same, and then I'll be back to show you how we work that nice short repeat that forms the textured panel that makes up the bulk of our blanket. Although this design is pretty much reversible because it looks almost identical on both sides, for the purpose of this tutorial I'm going to treat the odd numbered rows as right side rows. What that means is that as you grow your blanket, the side that faces you when you work your odd numbered rows is what I would class as the right side. The first time we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work to get our stitch markers into place, but every subsequent time you work your next row 1, you are just going to slip those markers instead of placing them. You want to start row 1 by knitting 9 stitches. Once you've knitted those 9 stitches, you're going to grab the first of your 2 stitch markers and just pop it onto your right hand needle. Then you're going to carry on and knit your way along the row until 9 stitches before the end of the row, and that will be when you have 9 stitches left to work on your left hand needle. When you reach that point, you're going to grab the second of your 2 stitch markers and again pop it onto your right hand needle. Then you want to carry on and knit 8 more stitches, and that should leave you with just 1 stitch left to work in the row. And for this final stitch, just like we did for our bottom garter stitch border, we are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 2 starts by knitting 9 stitches, and this is a good point to check that you have your stitch markers in the right place, because after your 9th stitch you should hit that first stitch marker. Slip the stitch marker over from your left needle to your right needle and then purl the next stitch. Now we're going to jump into a 2 stitch repeat that you're going to work along your row until you hit your second marker, and quite simply that 2 stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 1 and then purl 1, knit 1 and purl 1, and you're going to work that knit 1 purl 1 combination all the way across until you hit your second marker, and if you count your stitches correctly you should hit that after you've worked a purl 1. When you reach your second marker, you're going to slip it from one needle to the next, and then you're going to carry on and knit 8 more stitches. Last but not least, you are going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. For row 3, you are going to start by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then knit 1 stitch. And once again you are going to jump into a 2 stitch repeat that you're going to work across until you hit your second stitch marker, and for row 3 your 2 stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 1 and then knit 1, and you're going to repeat that combination of purl 1 knit 1 until you hit your second marker, and again if you've counted your stitches correctly that should be after you have worked a knit 1. Slip your second marker over when you reach it and then knit 8 more stitches. Finish the row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 4 by knitting the 9 stitches that take you to your first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and purl the next stitch. Then just like for row 2, you are going to jump into a 2 stitch repeat that you're going to work across to your second marker, and just like row 2 that 2 stitch repeat is knit 1 and then purl 1, and you are going to work that all the way across till you hit your second marker, and you should hopefully do that after you have worked a purl 1. Slip that second marker over as you reach it and then knit 8 stitches. That just leaves our last stitch, and we're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Rows 5, 6, 7 and 8 are all worked in exactly the same way, so I'm going to show you how to work row 5 and then I'm going to leave you to carry on and work row 6, 7 and 8 yourself. Just like with our bottom garter stitch border, we are going to knit our way across these rows because these rows form that little garter stitch stripe that you see on the blanket, and so therefore you just want to work your way across and knit every single stitch, obviously with the exception of that final stitch in the row that we work as our selvage stitch. When you get to your stitch markers, you want to slip them over from one needle to the next, and then once you reach that final stitch of the row, instead of knitting it, you want to make sure that you slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. So that is how you work these rows, and I will leave you to carry on and work the rows yourself, and I will rejoin you at the end of row 8 to show you how we grow the rest of our blanket. These 8 rows form the building blocks of our blanket, and you will repeat these until your blanket is about 4 to 5 centimeters shorter than you want the overall length to be. To make a blanket the same size as mine, 60 centimeters wide by 80 centimeters long, I repeated these 8 rows a total of 32 times. So after this first block, I went away and repeated it another 31 times. Once I'd done that, to get symmetry at the top and bottom, I work rows 1 to 5 once more before moving on to that top garter stitch border. I will now go away and work rows 1 to 5 myself again so that we do get that separation before I show you how to work the garter stitch border, but you can now go away and repeat these rows as many times as you feel you need to before you're ready to move on to the top border, and then don't forget to work rows 1 to 5 one final time before you start your top border. Your blanket will obviously be significantly bigger than my tiny little sample here, but just to give you an idea, before you start your top garter stitch border, you should have several repeats of this 8 row repeat, and then you will also have just the first section, rows 1 to 5, already completed before you move on to your top garter stitch border, and your first row of your top garter stitch border should be a wrong side row. So you will have what I would class the wrong side of your work facing you, and for this blanket, although it's almost reversible, you can see that on the wrong side you have 3 garter ridges, and on the right side you only have 2. Just like the bottom garter stitch border, the top border consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. I'm going to walk you through row 1 and I'm going to leave you to work rows 2 to 15 yourself, and then I will come back and show you how you cast off. As it's mainly garter stitch, it is nice and easy. You are going to knit your way across your row. And on this first row that you work, when you get to your stitch markers, instead of slipping them, you can take them off your needles because we don't need our stitch markers anymore at this point because we are no longer needing to mark our side borders. So you can just remove them. And then you are going to knit your way across your row, knitting every stitch with the exception of that very last stitch. And just like we have been doing for the entirety of this blanket, you are going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. I will now leave you to finish off row 1 by yourself and then go ahead and work rows 2 to 15 as well, and then we will be ready to tackle our cast off, the final row of this blanket. The last row of any knitted blanket is of course the cast off row. I like to use a really basic knitted cast off for my blankets. It is nice and easy to work and it gives a similar looking top edge to the type of edge that my cast on edge creates, so it just helps the blanket look symmetrical top and bottom. In this video I'm just going to show you how to work the first few stitches and then leave you to carry on yourself, but if you are new to this technique or need a bit more of an in-depth refresher, then I have a separate video that just covers the knitted cast off and I will link that up here for you now. To start your cast off, you want to knit 2 stitches. When you knit these 2 stitches, make sure that you don't let your tension get too tight, because otherwise when you work your cast off, your stitches will pull in and your blanket won't lay flat. So keep these stitches nice and relaxed as you work them. Once you've knitted the first 2 stitches, you're going to grab your left hand needle and pop it into the first of those 2 stitches that you worked from left through to right. Then you're going to pop your index finger on the other stitch just to hold it in place and stop it falling off your needles, and you're going to lift that first stitch up over the second stitch and then completely off that right hand needle, and you'll find that you've gone from 2 stitches on this needle to 1. Next, you are going to want to knit one more stitch so that you go back up to 2 stitches on that right hand needle. And once again, once you've done that, you're going to pop this left hand needle into the first of those 2 stitches from left through to right, lift it up, hold that second stitch in place as you lift it up, over and completely off your right hand needle. So the process of the cast off is to knit one and then lift one over, and then you should always make sure that you never have more than 2 stitches on this right hand needle, because if you do, you're likely to have gone wrong. So I'm going to leave you now to carry on and work the rest of this cast off edge, and I'll join you at the end just to show you how to secure that final stitch. At the end of your row, you should be left with 1 stitch left on your right hand needle and no stitches left on your left hand needle. At this point, you can break your yarn. You want to leave yourself a decent tail to sew in your ends. About 20 to 25 centimeters is normally enough. And then just to secure this final stitch here, I like to pull up to make the stitch bigger. At that point, you can get rid of your knitting needles. We don't need those anymore. And then you're going to pop your finger and your thumb through that loop and pick up the tail and pull it all the way through the loop. Then what you want to do is keep hold of that tail and pull, and you're just going to firmly pull to tighten it, and that gives you a nice secure finish to your cast off row. And when you sew in your tail, you will get a lovely neat corner. A couple of final bits and bobs before I leave you to your knitting. As with all my knitted blankets, I have a free written pattern on my website that you can follow along to alongside this video, and there is also a link there to purchase an ad-free PDF if you'd like something to print out. Also, I often get asked if my blankets can be knitted with a different weight of yarn. The answer is of course yes. You're just going to need to adjust the amount of stitches that you cast on, how many repeats that you work, and you're also going to want to pick knitting needles that are the right thickness for the yarn that you are choosing. Your knitting ball band on the actual ball of yarn will help guide you as to what size of needles you want to choose. Last but not least, I'm going to leave you with another little piece of knitting inspiration to keep you going until my next video, but that's all from me for today.